In this help video, I'm going to show you how to choose which pivot to do any MTPredictor work off. It's the same kind of tools we've got in our analysis of our MTP trade setups and our advanced trade setups, and also choosing our which pivots to place your decision points on. So I'm just going to look at the decision point tool at the moment. So what I'm actually looking at is this option here. In other words, the pivot selection. Here we have a number of options. We have either the last pivot, and what that means is, what it says is that you do a analysis or you place your DP off the last pivot on the chart. Then we can also do pivots back. In this case, you start at 0 at that pivot. So this one here would be 1, 2, 3, 4. So say I wanted to place a DP off this pivot, it would be 0, 1 pivot back, 2 pivots back. So in this case, I'd place 2 in the pivots back there. I'll then tick the box to place the DP, and as you can see there, it is placed off that pivot high there. And if I go back another pivot, you can see it comes off that one. If I go back another pivot, scroll down, it's then taken off that high, because that would be 4 pivots back from the last point. So you can use that to do a selection. Also, what you can do is you can then go off a specific pivot. So for example, if I wanted to place the DP off this pivot back here, this is quite a long way back. So what you can do is you can display the pivot labels. Do you see this here? So if I tick this box, it displays the pivot labels, and there's the pivot labels on the chart. If you hover over them, it also shows the bar number as well. But as you can see, that's a low, is pivot bar 34 and bar 11,572. But in this case, I'm going to do a DP off that pivot. So I'm going to do it off pivot 34. So in this case, I come down here and select pivot number. Do you see that? I'm now going to type in here 34. So this is now going to place the DP off that particular pivot. Pivot number, pivot bar 34. And as you can see there, it's placed that DP on the chart there. Once it's on, you can then turn off your pivot labels if you wish. So as you can see, if I do OK to clear it, you can see the DP off that low there came in and caught the low very nicely there indeed. A little tip as well is if it doesn't quite get all the way across, you can either go and extend it across. Perhaps I'll show this in our separate video, but you can either increase that to extend it across if you wish as well, or what I tend to do is I go to the drawing tools, I do a rectangle, I draw the rectangle round like that as well. That just gets a little rectangle around it, but that's just a PS for a separate video. So anyway, that's the way you do choose which pivots to do your either your DPs or analysis off. You can either use the last pivot, so I'll move that across there, either use the last pivot, which is that one. You can then do the pivots back, to then place off the pivots back. Remember, you're starting at 0 as the last pivot, so that would be pivot 0, that's pivot 1, that's pivot 2. So in this case, you're doing pivots back, 2 pivots back, it's then going to place the DP off there. Or as we've seen, you can do the actual pivot number, and then to find out which pivot number you want to place off, you can display pivot labels as in there. And as you can see before, I decided to do it off the pivot low of number 34. Pivot number 34, and that's the DP calculated off that level. You can as well, if you wish, to use the bar number, but obviously the bar numbers are going to be significantly higher than the pivot numbers, so I just tend to use the pivot number as well. So as you can see, it's quite easy to be able to first and foremost find out which pivot number you want to use, and then use the options here to either do pivots back, last pivot, pivots back, or absolute pivot number to do either your DP off, or exactly the same with your MTPredictor analysis. If you're doing your MTPredictor analysis, you can use you have the same options in here as well to then be able to choose the pivot to work from.